I'd like to call the meeting, the Land Conservation Committee to order. First item on the agenda is roll call.
George Bousset,
Here.
Gary Eater,
Here.
Pat Kinney,
Here.
Jim Schultz,
Here.
David Mindell, Charlie Ortman,
Here.
Jerry Richardson, and Gary Martig.
Okay,
Yeah, Gary's online.
introductions.
Thank you.
And is this Rich Huber also online?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Okay, now we can go to introductions.
Yeah, it's Ethan Rosing, USDA Wildlife Services, and I took over about a year ago working for the Wildlife Damage Abatement Claims Program for the DNR. So I'm the administrator for Ashland, Bayfield, Iron County. Go ahead.
Would you say your name again? I didn't quite catch.
Yeah, Ethan Rosing with USDA Wildlife Services, administering the Wildlife Damage Abatement Claims Program for the DNR. So.
Do you think it's necessary? I guess we've done that a couple other times, so yeah, we all pretty much know who's here. Okay. Number 3, public comments. Jerry.
I don't know if it's in order to be at this time to ask this question, but I'm quite concerned. I think everybody else is, but I want to know what the professional take is on the land conservation situation, the funding and so on and so forth, because of our administration and what's going on, the cutbacks, and it appears to me that government doesn't want to govern, but that's a concern. And I'm just wondering how we're doing, how we're setting, is there anything we can do about it? And because we all care about the environment. But would you please comment on that, Mary Jo, or anybody else that?
There's no commenting
anything
during public
about-
comment. We can't comment during public comment. The committee can't comment.
I'll give an update during my report.
Okay, any other public comments? Any online? Hearing none. We'll go on to approval of today's agenda. Charlie makes a motion. Do I hear a second?
Bousset, second.
George, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Action carried. Approval of the minutes. Charlie moves to approve. Do I hear a second?
Bousset, second.
George, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any other conversations with that or comments? Hearing none. Number 6, discussion in action items. Letter A, set 2024 wildlife damage program corn prices.
Yep, so everybody that has the packet for the Wildlife Damage Abatement Claims Program paperwork, the second piece of paper into that, there'll be a sheet that says USDA Wildlife Services crop prices proposals for Ashland County. And then so listed there, corn, soybeans, bee colony, wax rate, deep frame, hive, box. Those are all items that were part of claims for 5 different participants from this last season that had damage from bears. For the field corn and then the bee components and then soybeans were from some deer claims. And so the prices, those come from the sheet that's under that actually. Those are the sources where those prices come from. The corn price and soybean prices, those are over a year. So each month I averaged out all the prices over the course of a year from 3 different sources and came up with a price. And then down underneath those columns, there's Ashland and Iron County. Ended up the same prices for corn and soybeans. And that just basically is a list and printout of where those prices come from. So back to the price proposal sheet. Those are the prices that I used to compute the claims that were used for the 5 participants that had final claims anyways. So if there's any questions where those prices come from, I can try and elaborate on that more, but essentially it's the same procedure that we use from all the other counties too, Wildlife Services Administration, using multiple different sources and coming up with one base price. So if there's any questions on that, let me know. Otherwise, I just need a signature at the bottom of that when that's ready. So.
Pat's got a question.
For the bee colony deep frame and hive box, knowing that, to get a new, queen and bees and start over again, that stuff is expensive. It doesn't seem like those prices to me reflect what the beekeeper lost. It looks more like replacement cost, but you've lost that season of taking care of them. And then the risk of losing a colony is so high that I think on average, just replacing a healthy colony, because you lose the production or a lot of it that year, these numbers strike me as low. So I want to know how you came up with them.
Yep, absolutely good. So good point. So this producer, which just south of Ashland here, Tom Cunningham, he had an incident in late fall after honey production was all done. He put most of the stuff away and he had a bee come in and do some damage, or a bear come in and do some damage to his equipment, and did destroy one colony there. But his honey was gone at that point. And then I had him work with me and he gave me receipts from what he used to replace his equipment and bees and stuff like that. So those are the prices for the bee equipment actually came from him specifically. And that's where those prices came from. And I've got his receipts too in his folder. So that's where those came from.
Yeah, I know him. And if it happened then and he gave you those receipts, I'm fine with that.
Yep, good question. But yeah, that was a good point. That was after honey production. So yeah, that there's no honey production or no honey loss for him for his claim. So.
Any other questions, comments? Okay,
I'll make a motion that we set the wildlife damage prices as suggested by their DNR representatives.
do I hear a second? Second by Jerry Richardson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
For signing those is can Mary Jo sign those then? Is that the plan? If you get that copy, Mary, you can sign that copy right there will work.
All right, next item B. Approve the wildlife damage claims. Is that what we just did, or is that a little more entailed?
So that was the crop price proposal and
All right.
their crop prices, and then the claims are then come after that. So that's a whole nother
Remember the
thing.
ones listed in the handout here?
Yep.
Okay.
No.
We need another motion in discussion, or
Ethan, do you want to? Yeah, we're gonna need a motion to approve the wildlife damage claims. And then he can, or do you want to review the claims? I don't know if you got to review the claims first.
Yeah.
But
so-
we're gonna need a motion to approve the claims and then he can review what the claims were in Ashland County this year and how many bear were trapped and that sort of thing.
The one we reviewed was just the crop price proposals, for making the actual claims.
Do I hear a second? Second by Jerry. All in favor? Oh. Question from Pat?
Well, I'm wondering, when you look at the bears that you've moved and the claims, is there a correlation, a strong correlation with more bears from areas you moved and then higher damage? In other words, are we fairly effective at targeting moving bears from where you're seeing the most claims?
Yeah, if you guys want, if you want to go through these claims briefly, and then there's a printout on the top of that packet too, that, there's some pictures and stuff. If you wanted like to read through that and just kind of explain kind of how the claim or how the last season went, if there's time and want for that, I guess it's up to you guys. I can kind of help explain that a little bit better then too, maybe. So I'll just briefly go through it. So this printout is an overview of the last season essentially. So in Ashland County, there were 7 participants, 5 of which ended up with claims. The other participants that elected either not to have a claim, to do just shooting permits, or they didn't have enough to meet the deductible, so they opted not to do a claim. The total claims between the 5 participants was $21,533.93. One max payout, which is $10,000, was for one participant that had deer problems in soybeans. So last year we caught and relocated 28 ag bears, so just out of cornfields, essentially. The year previous to that, we'd caught 0. The year previous, 2023, was a very mild year for bear damage, and we had not at that time, we did not have a couple people that were enrolled that did enroll this last season due to the higher bear problems this year. Also, we were dealing with some elk issues. We used repellent on 2 different farms, and we also used some DNR lure cropping on one to try and incentivize elk to put pressure on places not where the farmer had his crops. And we had decent results doing both of those and plan to do more in the future. Then as well, we had 43 deer harvested under shooting permits this last season through the damage program. So in general, basically last year was a very unusual year. There was no snow melt. Then we had a real wet June and July, and then a real dry end of the summer, end of the fall, which basically turned into the perfect storm for a lot of bear problems. There was very poor food sources. All the natural foods had a pretty rough go of it last year, and we saw that in our bear problems. So looking down at the bottom of the sheet there, I have the counties split up from each year, 2024 and 2023, and the totals at the bottom. Essentially, last year between Ashland, Iron, and Bayfield County, the counties I work in, between nuisance bears and agricultural bears, we trapped 153 more bears from 2023 to 24. So what that kind of gives you an idea is there was a lot more bear problems. Bears were just getting a lot of things they weren't normally getting into. They were testing corn that wasn't even something they wanted to eat. There's a picture there of the corn there. You can see the 3 different cobs that says pre-milk, milk, and dough. The one in the middle is the one they want. Most of the corn that the bears were hitting this season were the ones that were called pre-milk, which essentially there's nothing for them to eat. It tastes maybe somewhat tempting, but there's no actual nutrients coming out of it. And it's something that most years bears won't touch until it gets to the dough or gets to the milk phase. But this last year they were hitting food that they weren't normally hitting. So in a nutshell, yeah, we had a lot more bear problems and a couple new enrollees, and that hadn't been in the program in the past too. So that kind of kicked up the bear problems and the bear efforts. And yeah, as far as the effectiveness of it, we've been having really good results. Most of these bears we're trapping, they're all going 20 to 40 miles away, released in public land, usually Chihuahua National Forest or county forest or something like that, where there's no crop ground. And the bears generally, we're catching those bears, we're moving at least 20, 40 miles away. It's rare they come back. If they do come back, which we don't really keep track of anymore, we used to tag some, we haven't tagged some for years because we did a couple studies on it and showed that there wasn't a problem with bears coming back, especially in the time frame of dealing with agricultural work, where if a bear comes back, by the time it comes back, the crop is past the point where the bears are actually doing damage and hanging out in the cornfields. and it gets that doe phase. And so we've been having really good success with it. And this year we had a lot of bear problems, caught a lot of bears, but also saved quite a bit of corn too from being damaged through the trapping. And Ashland County, there was no shooting permits. In Bayfield and Iron County, there was some shooting permits issued for some farmers that had severe damage. That trapping was being used, but also when necessary, if the damage is likely to exceed $1,000 or more, we will issue shooting permits to try and also help keep down the damage. In Ashland County, that wasn't a problem with bears anyway. So, yeah.
Could you just please remind us of the funding sourcing for the payments?
So the way that the program works is these claims will be paid basically once it's approved. Then I submit it to DNR, and DNR will send the money directly to these participants. When it comes to, there was some repellent spraying and stuff like that for elk problems. There was 2 farmers that had elk problems that we put repellent out for, and that was billed to the county, and then the county basically turns that over to DNR, if I'm correct, Mary?
Yeah.
Yep.
We get billed directly for the abatement measure, which is spraying. And then we pay that bill, and then we seek reimbursement from the DNR. So the most important thing to know is that this program is 100% reimbursed. And then we actually get a little bit extra to help administer it on an annual basis.
Thank you for that explanation. So as much as I'm out on the land that I own, and part of it was in corn this year, I really didn't realize the late summer dryness and the lack of food for bears was going to have the impact it did, because a lot of us were like, why are there suddenly so many bears? And as you know, with White River Ag out there, you got plenty of them. But there's, with the aerial views right now, they did an update in September of last year. And so the ground in corn, you can see this bear damage. And even right up to where our buildings are out there, I don't ever remember having bear damage that close before. So, not only are they hitting those fields hard and later than usual, they were just, in areas further away from the woods that they normally would be. And I'm thinking about this partly from a climate change perspective, that, if I'm not mistaken, with climate change, we're predicted to have lower yields on corn up here as we head through the century. And then if you factor in, we most likely will have drier, mid to late summers, that seems to have implications for bear food sources. And then this is one more thing that is different than it used to be when some of us were younger.
Yeah. And each year's different too, because the year prior to that, we had a record low for bear problems too, but we had a really good food source here too, for the most part, in a very mild winter. The year before that, we had a decent winter, actually, I should say. And, but we had very low bear problems, which trying to figure out how that works out, it's kind of a mystery sometimes too. But last year, yeah, a lot of bear problems, kind of in a nutshell. So, and one other thing to highlight too, at the bottom of that printout, there's 2 pictures of trail camera, pictures of elk. And those are off the food lure crops that DNR planned, which DNR for this program, these 2 one participant down in Butternut, having significant elk problems. We sprayed repellent on his crops, and then in fields in the same neighborhood that were not enrolled in the program, DNR came in and paid for and planted about 10 to 15 acres of essentially food plots for the elk to hang out on and feed without being pressured or bothered, and therefore leave the actual producers that were that are enrolled in the program, leave their crops alone. And we had really good success with that. I can't remember how much that costed through the DNR, but it was fairly minimal compared to some of the other sources or the other equipment and abatement techniques we've been trying to do. So, but Yelp utilized it quite well, and we're looking at doing some more of that this year for some problems up here by Marengo area too. So, and then there's a picture of a trailer there if the tire blew off. I blew off 3 sets of tires this last year just moving bears around. So again, just trying to paint a picture of how busy the bear problems were last year. Pretty busy. So, the next thing then is the actual claims themselves. Like I said, there's 5 of them. I don't know how normally these were done in the past. You want to just read through each one briefly, give you a quick overview of them? Does that sound good or sound good? So they hopefully are in order for you guys too. There should be 5 of them. The first one, Mark Jolma. He had significant problems with deer on soybeans. He's been enrolled in the past, but he was only getting shooting permits. This last year, he was fully enrolled, so he actually was able to receive a claim. He had to harvest a certain amount of deer within a certain time frame. He did that, so therefore he's eligible for the claim. Before the deductions and everything else, he had $25,308.45 in deer damage to his soybeans. The max payout for the program is $10,000. So at the end of the day, he has $10,000. But all those numbers at the bottom of the sheet list each of his fields. And so if you're curious about how these prices work out, essentially if you go across there's acres appraised, the damage from each field, an amount of acres for each of those fields. And then it goes into the samples and basically the loss of the bushels from each field, and then computed by the price of 10.76 per bushel gives your final numbers then for what he actually lost. And then, like I said, up above that, his final claim payment is the actual amount that he gets paid out, which is the max of $10,000. The next one in there is Morgan Peck. He's been in the program in the past for bear and elk. This year he was enrolled for bear and elk as well. Last year I think he was just elk, not bear for the last several years. Anyways, this last season he was enrolled for both bear and elk again. And same kind of deal there. Lists all his fields, how the math comes out. Before the deductions, he had $7,248.57. And then after deductions, the final claim payment is $6,398.86. Next one in there, Kretschmar, Dave Kretschmar. Again, listing his fields there, all said and done. He had a claim in Iron County as well as Ashland County, so the deductions and the are split up between both counties, and so his final claim payment is $521.13. Next one in there, Thomas Cunningham. Again, that lists his equipment there and his bees and everything at the bottom. And after the deductible, the claim payment is $1,008.75. And the last one, John Radler. Again, he's down by Butternut, and we trapped for bears there. We did catch a few bears. There wasn't enough to cause any damage bear wise, so all his damage was strictly elk. Last year, if I remember right, he had a max payout. He had a significant amount of damage down there. So this year we did a lot more to try and help him out. We did repellent and that's where the lure crops were. And we had good success with both of those. And also his corn didn't yield very good this year. He got his corn in kind of late. And anybody that got their corn in late this last season paid for it by having monsoon summer effect on it essentially. So his corn didn't do super great due to that. So his yields weren't great, but nonetheless, his final claim payment was $3,605.19. And I believe that should be all 5 of them there. If there's any questions on those. Yep.
You're going out there and actually measuring the crop in each of these fields?
Yes.
NRCS on their website for soils has a lot of stuff, including, different yields for crops, corn and soybeans included. Do you look at that data at all, and or do you take the data you have and give it to NRCS so they can update theirs?
I guess no, I have not looked at their data. And that's not a bad idea by any means. So be kind of curious to see how that compares. Yeah, no, I'm going out to each individual field that each producer has and taking 3 samples of corn that was not damaged, or soybeans, whatever it is in this case. Taking 3 samples and running out some my calculations to figure out what their bushel per acre yield is, and then I'm taking 3 samples of damaged areas as well, 3 to 4 samples, and running out my damaged yield then for each of those. With bear and corn, there's 0 left after the bear does their damage. With deer on the soybeans, like from our Jolma, I was doing a lot of samples on browsed on soybeans, and so basically there's a formula we use to calculate their damaged yield after the deer came through and ate half of the soybean plant, which is usually the case across their whole field or where there's damage anyways. So, but that's kind of where that comes from. But yeah, as far as the NRCS information, I've not looked at that or compared with that, but
Yeah,
I see what you're saying.
because it's
though.
there, and if it's accurate, it would save you from measuring. We could potentially use it. On the other hand, if you're gathering data, it would be nice, Michael Blunt, I take it, with NRCS, or Mary Jo can connect you.
Yep.
But you're gathering data that might be helpful to them as far as updating.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, no, I could see definitely collaborating with them. As far as our samples for my claims, I want the samples from their field specifically instead of just kind of using a general overview from like the NRCS or something like that. Because some farmers, one field from one side of the road, another side of the road, maybe he put a bunch of fertilizer on that field, prior, or this field has some low spots or something like that, or whatever it was kind of thing, or it gets a lot more pressure or something like that from different, damage or this or that. So each field specifically gets sampled, and that's kind of how the program works statewide, and trying to get as accurate a representation of how each individual field produced. So,
Ethan.
Yep.
Just for my notes here, so Mark Jolma, he had deer damage. Morgan Peck had elk and bear.
correct,
Kretschmar had bear only.
correct.
Thomas Cunningham was bear,
Yep.
and then Radlinger was elk.
Elk, and there was bear, but no quantifiable bear damage. So he was enrolled for bear and deer.
So his claim was for elk only.
Yeah. So
Okay.
yep, his claim payment though is 100% elk. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for our wildlife expert here?
Yeah, I got one. You already do the bear trapping and relocating. I've heard whispers, seeing how the elk herd in the High Bridge and Marengo area now is getting only larger. Is there any trapping and relocating that, or have you heard any talk of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I can talk more about that for sure. So yes, the DNR is working pretty hard, especially in Marengo area and the Butternut area. But the Marengo area is a little bit of a newer problem, and there's more producers that are being affected there. Butternut area, for whatever reason, generally the elk are only producing, bothering one producer, John Radlinger down there. Up here, these elk are starting to cause a lot more problems for other producers in the area. They're starting to move around a lot more. The good thing about these elk is they like to move around and sprinkle their damage around. Versus the elk down in Butternut, they just seem to center themselves on one field and cause problems there mostly, and that's it. These Marengo elk, yeah, they're causing problems not just for one person as much, but more so for a handful of people. Morgan Peck's kind of the brunt of it. And so we're focusing our efforts there mostly. But yes, the DNR is aware of the problem, and they're trying to, last I knew this winter, they wanted to do some trapping and relocating of elk, especially in the Marengo area. The biggest problem was going to be if we have enough snow on the ground to actually successfully trap for the elk, because the way they do that is they use corral traps that they essentially feed for a while, some bait in there, get the elk used to coming in there. Once things are good, the elk are going in there consistently. They got the right elk they want in there, because they can't just, there is a system to doing it, and they don't just trap any elk. They try to target certain elk in the herd. And I don't know exactly how they do it, but I know there's a process to doing it. And then once they've got enough elk coming in the trap, they'll actually use the trap, catch the elk. And then as far as where they're taking them, I haven't heard exactly what their plans are, but I know there was some plan in place to try and do that. But the main thing that plan was hinging on for trapping was if we had enough snow to do it. And this winter so far has not been enough. It's getting close, hopefully. But I know last I talked to DNR a month or so ago, they were wanting to do it. It just depended on the snow load. So, because yeah, I think that herd going into this last season, the Marengo herd was give or take 30 or 40 elk, and that was before calving. So what they're at right now, I can only imagine. And, for another year or two of that herd continuing to grow, which is on one hand a great thing, there's going to be a lot more problems. And so that's why we're trying hard to look into doing the DNR is looking to try and do some trapping, but also We did some repellent there. We had not as good as results there as we did down by Butternut. The problem up here was due to the rain, we had bad timing for spraying. The corn grew faster than anticipated. Once it did start to grow, it got hot, and that corn took off. And we were only using essentially a low boy sprayer that can only spray corn up to about 5 or so feet tall. Once it gets higher than that, the sprayer will damage the corn. And so the biggest problem right now is we're trying to figure out if there's any commercial plane or drone sprayers. So when the corn gets taller, we can continue to use repellent. And talking to Synergy and Ashland here recently, there's talk of at least 1 or 2 people that are looking to get certified to do contract drone spraying, which would be something the DNR would be probably pretty interested in trying to, do to keep the way the repellents work. I guess I should explain that is it's good for about 2 weeks. As fast as the corn grows, the coverage of the repellent can only cover what's actually on the plant at that time. And as the corn grows, within 2 weeks during the growing season, that corn has a bunch of new growth that's not then covered. And so that's the hang up the repellent is once that corn outgrows its last spraying application, it needs, after about 2 weeks needs more. And so it's just the caveat is we need to be able to get in the air to keep spraying it once it gets taller to finish out the season. So.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So,
The elk have been around my house a lot recently. In fact, we just saw them 35 last night on our walk. And it's been really fun. Like we've seen them 5 times in the last few weeks, and they've been on our trail camera on February 6th. Probably 25 of them showed up on our back property. So I understand the problems. I'm glad I'm not an ag producer, but it's also really cool to be able to see them when you go for walks at night or have them in your backyard. We're very fortunate up here.
For sure. And the DNR is aware that, there's lots of people that love the elk and there's lots of people that aren't in favor of them. And we're trying to find the happiest middle ground. We don't want to trap or relocate all the elk because obviously there'd be a lot of people that, like having the elk here. The elk didn't come up here themselves. They came from Clam Lake and found this area and have established themselves and are doing well. And so the DNR is trying to work with the elk and the public to try and, find a happy middle ground. And we're trying to reduce the population and still keep the herd here. The biggest gripe I've been hearing with producers in the area, if you're in the program, like I said, the couple people that are have claims here, they've been very happy with how things have been going. I'm working very hard to try and help with their problems and also make sure they're getting paid out for their problems as well and try and reduce damage as much as possible so the DNR doesn't have to pay as much and they don't suffer as much. The people in the program as well aren't having the significant amount of damage themselves. The biggest gripe, though, is the people that aren't enrolled in programs, and generally that hinges on is the way that the program works is if you want to be enrolled in the program and receive a claim, you have to allow public hunting for the species enrolled. So with elk, if somebody like the Marengo area is having elk problems and they're complaining about the elk and basically I've met with a couple people that did not want to be enrolled in the program because they had to allow public hunting for that species. And I've tried to work with them, talk to them. Essentially, when they're enrolled, you have to allow public hunting, but it's managed. And with elk, the nice thing is there's usually never, more than 6 or so participant or tags that are given out for the for us to hunt these elk. And so the odds of actually someone coming to those properties is not great, but it is a chance. So that's why it has to be allowed for public access. But ultimately, it's not going to be overrun with hundreds of hunters. It's going to be maybe a hunter or something like that. And so most people that I talk to, once I explain that to them, they're like, okay, I'll allow public hunting for elk in this case, and therefore be enrolled in the program. And it's worked out well for the couple people that are enrolled right now. The other people that haven't enrolled that I've talked to that didn't want to be in the program, that's their biggest gripe. And that's kind of what's been hinging on them being enrolled or not. So.
I know it's a separate program, but I thought you might have a sense that could tell us what's going on with wolves this year and predation by wolves.
Sure. Yep. So I work in the Ashland, Bayfield, Iron, and Douglas County area as well for all the wolf nuisance problems. I mainly do Ashland, Bayfield, and Iron County. Just yesterday, I looked at a couple wolf problems. One just south of town here, about 5 minutes. One over by Ino. One was where wolves are coming in and eating horse manure actually out of a guy's horse pasture, and no damage to the horses or anything like that, but they're interacting in the horse pasture and the person's aware. So after I'm done here, I'm actually going to go set up a radio to try and deter the wolves from hanging out and frequenting that area. Kind of unusual. So in a nutshell, this last season we had a very busy year for wolves as well. I don't have the numbers and stuff handy, but I can just tell you it was at least as much, if not more than the last handful of years. In other words, telling me that, yeah, there's been, a steady amount of problems and continuing to arise with more problems. And right now, yeah, everything's kind of up in the air with, politics and stuff, what's going on with delisting. And I know there's been a recent bill that's trying to get passed to try and delist them again. And it's bouncing back and forth, and what's going on with that, I don't know. But I know there's a lot more push than there has been in the last couple of years to try and get them delisted again. DNR, and for the most part, everyone's more on board with it. It's just it's in the courts right now trying to get settled.
Well, I was just motivated to ask because I just called out on a meeting by my neighbor who called to say, keep the dogs in the house because we're down on the White River Reservoir. And he said just a rather aggressive wolf just came through the yard. So
Oh, no
it's
kidding.
there.
Well, and so anybody that has situations like that, I try to encourage as many people as possible to contact USDA Wildlife Services, and then they'll dispatch someone if it's in this area, probably me, and come in and look at. I had a case yesterday I looked at as well too, where a producer, actually a participant in the program for Bayfield County, had some spoiled feed that was being set aside for me to come take a look and quantify the damage. Before I came there, the deer started feeding on the spoiled feed. Well, after a few days of that, there was a concentration of deer there. Next thing you know, a wolf came in and actually chased the deer and killed the deer right up next to the person's house, 50 feet from their door. And so I came and looked at that and verified that and talked to them about, not feeding the deer essentially right there next to their buildings. And that should hopefully alleviate the wolf problem. But nonetheless, this time of year is pretty common to see, wildlife being stressed out due to winter. Now we're getting a little bit of snow finally. It's been pretty cold. So deer pushing up closer to people's buildings, trying to get feed out of feeders or anything they can eat. And therefore the predators are following them too. So, they're getting pretty bold, just because of, getting hunger in this time of the winter. And so anybody that's having, problems with wolves, like I said, definitely encourage to call Wildlife Services, and happy to come out. And if there's wolves, especially coming close to people's houses, happy to come and take a look and document what's going on and, assess if there's something that can be changed to deter that behavior or, what's going on there. So.
Okay, any more questions, comments? So we're looking to take a vote to approve the 2024 wildlife damage claims. Am I reading that correctly now?
Hussein moves to approve the 5 claims presented.
Yep. So it's already been motion and approved. Is that the way I heard it correctly?
There's a motion and a second on the floor. We
Yep,
still have to
yep.
vote. Yeah.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Say
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that interesting report. Yes. Okay, open discussion for Land Conservation Committee inputs and comments to be passed on to the County Board's Planning Committee with regard to the upcoming Ashland County Comprehensive Plan update. George?
Okay, so I chair the planning committee now, and we're just getting started. And I know Mary Jo has been doing a lot of work on the ag preparatory segments with Lissa Radke. But the committee, we intend to ask each department to provide their thoughts to be included in the plan. And we plan to ask each committee so that the members of the committee, aside from the professionals in the departments, might have ideas that they want to have considered in the planning process. So one of the most efficient ways for us to respond to that upcoming request from the plan committee is for this committee simply to have this kind of discussion, have it in our minutes, and then we can simply just forward our minutes of our discussion at this meeting or a future meeting to the plan committee, and they will have our input in a very efficient way. So I don't know if anybody wants to offer any thoughts that should be, in their mind, should be considered in the planning process, but this would be an opportunity for members of staff and or this committee to get that on the record in our minutes and for that then to get considered in the planning process. So that's why I asked for it to be on the agenda. And so everybody has a chance for input.
Anybody have any thoughts or inputs or any further discussion? Charlie?
I know Mary Jo is going to give a briefing on F on land spreading and PFAS, but I would just like to inform everybody here, the landscape with PFAS has changed pretty drastically in the last 4 to 6 months. I was I spent 2 years doing a wetland easement and it was denied because of municipal sludge had been spread on the land and that's too much PFAS. So the USDA is not approving any easements at all, at least yet, if you've had sludge or even the presence of PFAS possibility. They lowered the number at the EPA to 1 part per trillion. So I think perhaps in our comprehensive plan, we should try to determine what the county's PFAS profile is somehow or another and start figuring out what we might need to do if certain ag producers can't produce anymore. My understanding is PFAS sludge can't be spread in the usual spots anymore. I've been reading this, though it hasn't been vetted by the conservationist yet. It's pretty new. Everybody's still basically in the response, what should we do now phase. But it's important that we get a handle on it. And I think in the comprehensive plan, it may be appropriate to try to do something in that vehicle as well. I'm not sure. These are just the thoughts that I'm having right now. And of course, smarter people will have to weigh in on this. That's all I have. Thank you.
I would agree with Charlie that we should incorporate something into the comp plan on PFAS. There might be several places that lands, but on the wetland reserve easement, it's not just the PFAS, it's really any other form of contamination that might concern them, from farming or other activities, industrial activities, and even a household septic system, there's always a risk there. So, even a small amount on those things, they're not going to want to use that ground. So people should understand that when they make choices on land use, that some of this stuff, if you expose it to, any of these things, PFAS included, that you then can limit your eligibility for conservation programs. And I know on the PFAS, even with home gardening and produce, soils that have had municipal waste spread on them, some of those plants uptake a fair bit of this stuff, and we don't want it. So as we think about local food production, et cetera, I think we need to know our history of where septic waste has been spread historically. We know the current sites, but we don't necessarily know the full history of where septic waste has been spread. We'd have to, somehow go back and dig out those records with the DNR, because there might be people buying land and they don't understand the history, and therefore what they would like to do with that land may not match what they're going to be able to do or programs they apply for. So I think it's an enormously important issue.
Any other comments? Mary Jo?
I think that in our comprehensive plan, we are going to need to include strategies for climate adaptation when we're talking about transportation, economic development. We need to be aware of our changing climate up here and take into consideration how we build infrastructure so that it accounts for variable conditions in the future. We're also going to have a pretty big impact with climate migration, people that are moving north. And it's already starting to occur. So I have some concerns about how we plan for population in the future. How would that affect our wastewater treatment? How does that affect our land development? How does that affect our lot sizes and fragmentation as we have more and more people moving here? What is that impact going to be on our land and water resources? And that needs to be part of our consideration as we plan for the future. We're going to see some of these changes as early as 2040 with large populations of people moving north from areas in the south that are becoming too hot to survive and too hot for agricultural growth. I have not read all of Bayfield County's comprehensive plan, but their plan is very thorough about how their forests are going to be affected. We have species in our forest right now that may no longer be surviving here in 20 years. So what do we want to do at our county forestry level to adapt to species that are going to be more suitable? How do we want our transportation systems, our natural resources to look? So I think there's a lot of considerations that are in other plans that we may be able to adopt for ourselves as well. And like George said, I have been serving on the Agriculture Committee. So a lot of these climate adaptations are already coming up on that committee. And I'm serving on the Natural Resource Committee as well. We've met 3 times for each committee. And a lot of these topics have been recommended. And then I'm also serving on the Town of Marengo Comprehensive Plan Update. So we've been discussing these issues as well. Thank you.
I'm taking this forest adaptation class, through the USDA. And so as much stuff as I found prior to that, there's a lot more resources than I was aware of, which is all good stuff. It's research-based and well done. I backtrack to looking at my soils in particular as I look at forest adaptation, because my soils vary from this high sandy stuff that is highly subject to wind erosion down to lower ground where I've got a wetland 1/8 of a mile away. So it's really interesting property. It has as much variation as you could imagine. But I need to understand my soils better, the level of organic matter in those soils as far as potential establishment of whether it's vegetative cover or trees, because it turns out it's harder to get anything going on some of that ground that is so highly eroded. But then even with these heavier rainfalls, some of the ground that's lower, it's going to be wet longer, and the suitability for certain trees there, it might be too wet. So, wetter than it used to be. So we're seeing these changes in what trees will grow and not grow over the last 20 years. It's an incredibly complex thing. And the other thing is you look at the soil maps, as your soil changes, so does your forest start to change on that, but so does the vegetative cover, all of which means, George, there's a whole lot more to learn than I realized, and I suspect a lot of people realize as far as this adaptation with forests, but also vegetative cover, which also then has implications as food sources for, wildlife, insects, birds, et cetera. So I think we could do a lot more with that because it's really complex and interwoven. And not just carve it up into say, the forestry department's going to do trees, because all of this is so integrated. We need a holistic approach.
Thank you. Any other comments, concerns? We've had the discussion. I'm assuming you've been doing some writing there, George. You're taking notes, and this is what you're looking for?
Exactly the idea.
Okay,
to get everybody's opinions and thoughts, boil them down.
very good. Okay, moving on. Approval of wildlife damage program year-end 2024 budget amendment.
I don't think we actually have an action item there. We had that on there as a placeholder in case we needed to do the amendment, but we've already filed our year-end reimbursement claim for 2024. And we got everything worked out through the reimbursement claim, so we don't actually have to file an amendment. And we didn't realize that until after we had already sent out this agenda. So all wildlife damage program expenses for 2024 have been paid and all reimbursements have been submitted. So we're good to go there.
Okay, very good. 2025 local contractor and equipment rental rates. I see there was in that handout there, we need to have discussion on that.
I'll just briefly go through that. So on the very left-hand side, it has all the equipment we commonly see used for conservation practices being installed by landowners on their own. The next column is what the current local rates are. Those haven't been updated since, I believe, 2021 or 22 was the last time an in-depth look was taken at those. Last year, we had adopted the Highway Maintenance Manual as a supplementary document to help keep rates consistent. That will continue in the future with updated rates that come out every January. These rates were composed from local contractors and rental companies, as noted at the bottom of the second page. I did not include individual breakdowns of everyone, but I included the ranges of the prices as well as the average. And the recommendation on the right side was rounded up from whatever the average was or whatever the current rate is if the average was lower from those sources. Are there any questions on that?
Any other questions? Charlie? Motion was made to accept 2025 rental rates. Is there a second?
This is Pat, I'll second.
Second has been made. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh. Question?
Nope. So the prices on the current LCC column, those are what we had last year. And I believe the last time we updated those at the local level was 2021 or 2022. So that's why some of these you're seeing quite a jump as times have gone on. Prices have gone up on some things. Others, they've stayed relatively the same.
Yeah, Jerry, the rates have only increased, which this would be a payment either to the local producer, landowner, if they're doing the work themselves, or it would be a local contractor that's been hired. So this is basically the acceptable rate that we will pay them for their construction or work on the land. And then that gets reimbursed through our land and water cost share program. So it actually pays a better rate to the contractor or the landowner. And the only maybe downfall, if you call it a downfall, is that it utilizes more of our cost share money for a project. But once again, that payment is going to the local person.
So once again, Rachel, could you remind us of the funding sourcing through the cost share program? How does that flow? And so the question is, when these rates are increased, is it going to impact your ability in terms of how many hours you can actually contract?
So everything is going to be reimbursed through the state through DATCAP program. So we get 50,000 a year. That rate could go up or down future years. With that pot of money, the producer or landowner that installs the project, we want to make sure they get a fair rate for running their equipment. So if they're running a big old tractor, we want to make sure that we're actually covering the price that it costs to run that equipment, just as if they would go rent a piece of machinery or a contractor would charge for their tractor. So for example, with the large over 221 horsepower tractor, you're seeing anywhere from 85 was our current rate, and that was on the very low end of what people were running them for. And on the high end, it would be if you contracted that out, contractor may charge up to $109 an hour. So we want to make sure that our producers and landowners are getting compensated fairly, and that's why we're revising these.
Mr. Chair? So a follow-up question then on that, Seth. If the amount of funding available from DATCAP is 50,000, then raising our rates to payout means that we can't contract as many hours of equivalent services unless the state raises that 50,000 limit, right?
Correct.
Okay, just to know that.
Yeah, and I guess I would just say that typically we work on 6 to 9 projects a year. 6 to 9, we average about 6 to 9. So if we're doing like a large manure pit, that's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars. It's going to utilize most of our money. If we're doing smaller projects like a critical area planting or a smaller fencing project, we're going to be able to fund more projects because it doesn't cost as much. But if we increase the rates here, it's not like we're going to go from funding 6 to 9 projects a year to only being able to fund 2. It's not going to have that much impact on the grand scale of the average cost of a project to really limit our ability to have improvements on the land. So I still feel like, what Seth is recommending, it's still really important to pay the actual going rate for these people to utilize their equipment. And it's not going to have enough impact on us for us not to be able to serve the people that are requesting assistance annually. It might pinch us a little bit thinner, but it's not really going to have a great impact on our ability to put conservation on the ground.
No, I'm totally fine myself with these changes in the rates and that implication, but it also makes it something we can bring up with our state representatives in terms of needing to pay attention to increasing costs.
Yeah, because really we're getting the maximum amount we're going to get. It's not, the cost share is not on a sliding scale where you can keep requesting more and more money. We're pretty much maxed out. And the state has not increased that level of funding in the 20 years I've been in conservation.
Dan?
Just so you know, increasing reimbursements and funding for land conservation is one of the big issues that WCA is pushing this year. So,
Pat?
Mary Jo, when you do projects, there's often whoever's landed it's on, they're doing some work in kind, correct? And so there's this balance, I think, some people have, more ability to write a check than others, but if you're designing a project and there's a certain percent that's in kind, the rates being fair also contributes to that landowner being able to say, I have the equipment and ability to do the following and get to that in-kind portion of it. Versus if the rates were extraordinarily low, some landowners might have to say, okay, I can do a certain amount with my equipment and time, but now I'd have to write a check to cover, some other parts, and that would potentially limit some people saying yes to doing a project. So there's trade-offs to that. It gets fair rates get people involved in the program sometimes that might not otherwise get involved. So.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. Any other questions, comments? So we already have the motion and the second, correct? All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. F, the land spreading in PFAS.
Land spreading and PFAS, polyfluoroaromatic carbons, which are forever chemicals. So Charlie kind of gave a brief introduction of this. This has been brought to my attention. PFAS are chemicals that accumulate on the landscape and in the water, and there is currently no treatment or way to get rid of PFAS. Historically, PFAS have entered our waters from, they're highly, highly utilized or used to be utilized in flame retardant. So when firefighters would spray foam retardant that was loaded with PFAS. So in areas where firefighters have practiced, where they have practiced spraying this foam, those lands have become highly contaminated. PFAS are also a chemical material that has been applied to rain gear. So anything that has Gore-Tex in it, it's a material that's used to repel water. It's also been used in our cookware, pans, to prevent nonstick. So we're seeing PFAS contamination in groundwater right now and in wells. And a lot of that is coming from when we launder our clothing, when we wash our dishes, it's washing off of these types of surfaces and it's contaminating, it's going into our septic systems and contaminating wells and groundwater. So PFAS contamination is very high in wastewater sludge. So all of our municipalities across the United States that treat wastewater, PFAS is present in that sludge. And as Charlie mentioned, we do have a practice where the wastewater treatment facilities spread that sludge on vacant lands, farmlands, open lands. So they are able to develop contracts with landowners where they will take the sludge that's left over after the sewage treatment process. They end up with material that accumulates and they have to get it out of the sewage treatment facility. So they go spread it on land. It's a legal process. And last year, Charlie had requested the city to test the sludge for PFAS, and there was PFAS present. And at that point, it met the safe standards that had been approved. What we didn't know is that now the federal program, NRCS, and other programs, they are not allowing lands to be enrolled in any sort of conservation easements if these lands have been spread with biosolid or septic. So we have a couple of farms in Ashland County that have been contracted for wastewater sludge to be spread. In our land and water plan, we also have about 50 farms or private lands that have been permitted for private septic spreading. So our septic companies, when they go and pump private septic holding tanks, they spread that material onto lands that have been allowed to be spread. And we have at least 50 of those in Ashland County that I see on a map in our land and water plan. So what I need to do is talk to our GIS person, Brittany, and find out, who are the people. Basically, I can see them on a map, but I don't have data points on who the landowners are. But as we start learning more about PFAS, there is concern about where the PFAS, how we are actively spreading PFAS. PFAS does bioaccumulate, which means that it builds up in the soil and in plant and human tissues. So when PFAS is spread on farm fields that grow hay, it is bioaccumulating or building up in the grain material, and then it can spread to animals that feed on that and then move right up the chain to humans. It's similar to mercury. When mercury ends up in a lake, it ends up in the benthic organisms that are feeding in the lake, and then it moves into fish and can move into humans through consumption. So I have reached out to my colleagues across the state to find out who has any sort of experience with PFAS contamination, what's happening at the county level. Are counties developing any sort of policy or ordinances? And unfortunately, there is not much happening yet. Oneida County has an entire township with their well water is all contaminated, and that was from flame retardants and fire departments doing practice spraying. So that is called the town of Stella. There's a lot of information on the internet about the contamination there, but there is not treatment yet. And they have developed there was one resolution that was developed at the state level to try to provide education on PFAS contamination in drinking water supplies, but it wasn't tied to any specific land practices or actions that were occurring. It was more of we need to do something at the state level to educate people about PFAS and provide safe drinking water. So I'm bringing this to the Land Conservation Committee to determine what we want to do about this, what we want to do at the county level, whether we want to start doing some testing. Testing for PFAS is very expensive. We run a well testing program through our department every year where we offset the cost of well tests for landowners, and we can fund about 40 to 50 well tests annually. And we're testing for homeowner kits, which is mostly bacteria, E. coli, and we also do heavy metal testing. And that costs our department about $60 per landowner that gets tested. PFAS testing was $900? $600. We did have one landowner 2 years ago that requested PFAS testing, and they paid for it out of their pocket. But we did find a lab in Wisconsin that could do the testing, and that cost the landowner about $600. So it's very costly. There is not grant money right now available for this type of testing. I do think that there's probably some grants out there that we could get creative, but I'd have to do research to find out what sources of funding are even available if we wanted to start doing some testing, specifically around lands where this septage has been spread for decades is my greatest concern. What do their well samples look like? So that's my comments, and I think we should have some conversation around it.
George?
I just had two thoughts about this that I would think we should get more information about. So these are known in the common discussion as forever chemicals. I'm just wondering if there's anything known about in any ways in which these chemicals will break down. So it seems to me that sunlight does not break these down like sunlight will break down certain things. The other thing I think we ought to know a little bit more about is the level that's risk that is actually inherent in this. It can all sound very scary, but is this, one person in a million going to get maybe, some form of cancer? Or is this something that's actually quite significant compared to other health risks? Those would be two ways of thinking about it.
Charlie?
I can address some of that with what I've read. Caveat it, and I've read quite a bit. It's associated with like 5 different kinds of cancer and high blood pressure at this time. That doesn't mean there won't be more. I won't say that's it. But the scary part of it is the safe level has been plummeting ever since they started looking at it. When it's really bad out east. There's lands out east that are unfarmable, farms that were just completely shut down because they were taking sewage sludge from like the New Jersey. These really high concentrations of big cities have big sludge problems, and the farms are taking it, and now a bunch of those farms are gone. I don't know where the studies of the links to the cancers came from, but they seem to be common throughout all the literature I'm reading. I will let you know what my PFAS level is. I've been on a farm, and I've probably been drinking. Also, the stuff really leaches into the water. So my mother's farm has got, I hope the clay pan saved us, but if not, my mother and I have been, of the surviving remaining Ortmans, we're going to have the most concentration of PFAS in our blood. And I have high blood pressure, and for 3 years I've been trying to figure it out. It's been going up despite all my efforts to bring it down, and it's just, so I talked with my doctor the other day, and she was like, whoa, okay, well, that's a whole new spin. So I'm trying to figure that out, and I'll be happy to share my numbers with everybody. But it is the USDA dropped, or the EPA dropped the number of parts per trillion to 1 or less. To be anything over 1 they see as a danger, and that was coming down from 5 to 3 to 2. Now it's at 1. Who knows, it might drop more. But I've got some things going on that I can share from a real test case here in town. We've been had Ashland sludge dropped on our fields for probably 40 years. So not to say 40 years ago it had PFAS in it. It's a relative, who knows when it started getting this concentration. But I think from my perspective for the county, a PFAS profile, like Mary suggested, it costs 30 grand to test to 50 sites. If one water test. But that would be the far end. Maybe that's not the optimal way to do it. Maybe we sample 25 of them in the same, depending on where these sites line up. If they're close to each other, maybe we get one test. But I think just to figure out what our PFAS exposure is right now, snapshot in time. And then as we figure out what we can do about PFAS, maybe we take a site, pick a optimal site to try to do some remediation. But remediation doesn't look good. Being a forever chemical, the answers to remediation in the past, including down here on our lake, have been you scrape it up, you bake it, and then you bury it somewhere in a controlled landfill with a collection underneath where the water, it's all controlled. There's nothing allowed to escape out into the environment. I hope that isn't what has to happen. I've been reading that it might be possible in humans to reduce the PFAS in your body. I read that, but nobody said why or how. I haven't read anything about how, but some articles have stated that you can reduce your PFAS buildup if you personally have some. My doctor didn't say that was possible. She said that, that what it is what it is. So more on that later. But just back to what we should do, I think at a minimum, we should establish a county PFAS profile the best we can with what money we can find. Thank you.
George?
Really relevant. So I think I will ask that the PFAS question be added to the Health and Human Services agenda. And I don't know whether this department has had any contact with folks in Health and Human Services on the question.
Absolutely. Good catch, George.
Dan?
Just so everybody knows, in the last biennium budget, the state appropriated $125 million for both grant programs and research and testing and staffing. They've been fighting, the governor and the legislature have been fighting about the money. So JFC has not released it yet. The governor is proposing and another increase of $20 million to $145 million in the next budget. So at some point, the legislature and the governor will agree, and there'll be some state money out there to do all the testing.
So I am aware of one of my colleagues in Door County. They used 400,000 of their ARPA funds, and they did hire a company that's been conducting well tests for 4 years now. They're mostly testing on microplastics in their drinking water, which are all exceeding safe standards. They are also testing for PFAS in some of the wells, and they are finding PFAS chemicals in their drinking water supply. So they're basically collecting research and data right now, but there hasn't been any sort of remediation or treatment. My understanding of treatment, water treatment processes is that a couple of years ago, the city of Wausau was looking at upgrading their drinking water treatment system. And they did have citywide contamination of PFAS. So they were providing drinking water to people within the city. And I believe they did, when they were going through their upgrade, they did retrofit their upgrade to be able to treat for PFAS. But as far as I know, that would be the only municipality that has any sort of treatment for PFAS. Okay, so it only treats to 20 parts per million present. It doesn't treat beyond 20 parts per million, which raises a concern for, what is safe? Can you even treat to a safe level? And there are PFAS in Lake Superior, in all of the communities around the lake. That's where we get our drinking water from. So there is concern that there currently is no treatment for this right now to a safe level.
Pat?
Testing and finding out what we got is one thing, but the other part of this is, can the sludge be put into some type of landfill? We've got the clay up here. Does it make any economic sense to have an area, that's a landfill? And what it might be is just some, rather flat fields, with some dirt moved so that there's a boundary around it, so rainwater and snow water won't carry anything from it. And, it just gets piled up there. So the contamination is fairly sequestered on that area. I don't know if it's cost effective or not, but.
I mean, landfilling is an option. I mean, do we have that option here? I don't know. Has the city talked about alternative means for sludge? I don't know. I know right now what we're doing is spreading PFAS. And so my concern is, this is an activity that we're actively doing. Do we need to change our behavior? And what the answer to figure out how to solve it, I don't know what that is at this point.
George?
One thought on that I might bring up with Health and Human Services would be a comprehensive listing of products to be avoided in our homes. So if there are cleaning materials or other substances that are going into our holding tanks, for people to become aware of what to avoid might be a small first step.
Charlie?
I think one of the big considerations of future land spreading is the leaching. I mean, I could see, like, I was thinking, well, my mother's place is not, it's not gonna be solved overnight, and if a continued spreading would not make the problem any worse, but would it hurt to let them keep spreading there? And I'm open to that if, like, I think if I end up being unfurther, I don't know if I'm damaged already, but if it turns out through some act, like we got a PFAS water filter, I'm not sure it's adequate now, but if the damage is done and there's a few places we could keep spreading, then sure, I would be open to that. Our property would be, we would talk about that and possibly be open to it, but it may be that, they say, the literature I read said, no, you can't spread PFAS. If it's got PFAS in it, you can't spread it like normal. And I think that's because the leachate. I don't have a liner under mom's farm. So anything going down into the water is going down into the groundwater, and then that's going wherever it goes. So I think we just don't know quite enough yet to be able to come up with even a little bit of a roadmap to livability or adapting to this. And of course, a PFAS profile is gonna, however we determine we can do that, until we know what our numbers are and what areas are actually impacted or polluted with this, whatever you want to call it. Until we know what land is not affected by PFAS and what land is and what water is and isn't affected, we can't really decide how to go. So I think we really just have to focus on finding a way to test all these lands, the volume of PFAS in the land and then the volume of PFAS in the water under it. And then we can try to come up with some solutions. But until we have that, we can't plan. We can't plan a thing. So I think the PFAS profile is number one.
Yeah, and Charlie brings up a good point. When we talk about testing, we're talking about soil testing and groundwater or well testing. So these are two separate types of tests. We want to know what the accumulation is of PFAS on the land, and we also want to know, is it leaching into our wells and our groundwater?
Charlie?
Health and Human Services, brilliant. Thank you for that. But also, could Northwest Regional Planning help us with any of this? Is this on their radar at all yet, as far as funding? We have a grant writer here in the office in this meeting. Does anything come up in your head that we could approach? Okay. Okay. All right, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I can reach out to our Northwest Regional Planning Commission and find out if they've done any work on this at all or any grant writing. I also know that our League of Women Voters is on top of this. They reached out to me a few weeks ago or a few days ago and asked about PFAS contamination specific with Line 5. Because supposedly there are some practices for horizontal directional drilling that also can lead to PFAS contamination. So they've asked me to attend, the League of Women Voters have asked me to attend a meeting next week to talk about PFAS, where it comes from, what the levels are, and what we know about it in Ashland County. So I will be bringing up this new topic now. So I know that they are concerned about this topic, mostly connected to Line 5, but just overall concern in general about PFAS and land contamination in the county.
Pat?
We're on one of the Great Lakes, and I'm wondering if through the GLRI, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding, if there's any money in there for filtration for septics, treatment plants that discharge the water into a Great Lake. I don't know if there is. We could look for money there, but maybe that's a place the federal government would be considering willing to add some funding if we lobbied for it, so that the city had a better filtration than they have now to limit what goes out there.
Charlie?
I do have one more. I think from a county level also, it might be time to approach lawsuits, because out east, 3M and other producers of PFAS have already paid out millions. They've filed and settled lawsuits for 10 years now, just on PFAS. And Wisconsin is going to be late to the game because it's moved out. It's moved west slowly, but it's here and it's statewide. We just haven't all joined together yet. We're all siloed. But just like we joined on to that counties association lawsuit for the opioids, I mean, we didn't get much out of it, but you never know. Obviously, even now, we've got time and money. We're already talking about having to focus and find to solve what problems it's caused here. It might be time to start tracking that, just keep a file so we can associate a number if we can get into a class action lawsuit. Or maybe let's start one with Douglas County and Sawyer and Price and Iron. They're in the same boat. They just don't know it yet. They're all in the same boat. Some of them know it, some of them don't. But the money is there's already passing or talking about national legislation insulating municipalities from being sued for it because they're a pass-through. They didn't know they were collecting sludge in their sewages. So really, why should they pay for 3M's problems? And I agree with that. But still, we will have to make a motion against a company if we're ever going to try to collect part of whatever they end up paying in damages. So that's the other aspect. That's all. Thank you.
Any more? Pat?
It occurs to me with the Ashland septic system, you've done some testing, there's PFAS there, but it'd be interesting to know the profile of that PFAS and see if it reasonably correlates with, say medications that people take and pass through their body, or if there are things in that profile that would suggest people are putting things down the drain, the toilet that shouldn't be going down there. It's not that many years ago, the old thing with throw your old meds down the toilet and flush it, it's not that many years ago. That was common practice and wisdom and advice. And I have to wonder, we've got Clean Sweep, which is a good thing. Not everybody participates. But if you looked at that profile, if the city did testing, maybe there's stuff that, shouldn't be going down there. So there's more education to do in terms of properly disposing of things and then advertising Clean Sweep maybe more than we are to limit what goes where it shouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my comment on that, like what I know about PFAS is it's mostly coming from packaging and surfaces. So the big things are microwave popcorn bags, sandwich wrappers, like wrappers of things at Quick Trip, burgers, hamburgers from the fast food places. It's coated on these wrappers to prevent sticking. It's also in makeup, flosses, paints, and stains. So if people are dumping paint or stain down their drain, that would be a product that would be causing it in the drains. It doesn't come from medications, but it's also extremely common in carpeting and rugs, things that they're trying to prevent flame. It's also very common on furniture, upholstery. And then clothing would be any sort of water repellent. So that's how it's getting in our laundry machines. Like if you wash a raincoat or rain pants, or even some of these fleece shirts have a repellent on them now that make it resistant, rain resistant. So anytime you launder that kind of stuff, it's going down the drain. And then all nonstick cookware. So pots and pans. So not so much in like medications, but it's in other products that a surface has actually been applied to these materials.
Any more? Jerry?
How about plastic? That part of it? Does that coincide together?
Well, plastic is a whole nother issue.
Okay, that's what
Yeah, plastics are breaking down and causing what's called microplastics. So that actually has particles, microscopic particles that are now in our drinking water. So a plastic that breaks down is actually a solid material. It's a particle, and PFAS are an actual chemical. So that's the difference. They're both problems, and they're both in our drinking water, and they both have human health impacts. But they're two separate sources of contamination.
Pat,
I guess this is the time I should bring this up. Somebody asked me in regard to microplastics. Is there any business activity, in this area that creates lots of microplastic in the course of the work that they do? And do we have any data to have any information on the level of microplastics created, health hazards to individuals that work in those areas? And then, given the wind direction, is some of this spreading out to Bad River? And are there implications for that? And so, it's a really good question, just from a health perspective, from what I know about some people that have worked in that activity. I wouldn't want to work there. But then given the wind, we all have heard about, the rolls of plastic and things blowing through the industrial park. I can only imagine the microplastics that then move out. And we know there's microplastics out on the Apostle Islands from testing there. So I don't know where that came from, but I think we should include something on microplastics and see if any business that creates them, has adequate filtration, both for health reasons and limiting what gets into the environment.
any more questions or comments? Charlie?
I should just stop, but I've been reading so much. Pat, to your point, I read an article that came up with all the PFAS articles about microplastics, and some hospital or medical place has done a study, and it said that we all have the equivalent of one plastic spoon of microplastics in our head. Of course, I can't vet any of this stuff, but it seems to be coming from reliable sources. So if that's any indication, it explains why I can't think and walk at the same time anymore.
It's interesting that Charlie just brought that up because my colleague in Door County, who's doing all this microplastic study, he just sent me that statistic this week. And I started a statewide working group 2 years ago called the Recycling Plastics Work Group. So quarterly we meet and we are working towards reducing single-use plastic in the state of Wisconsin. I'm meeting with someone tomorrow to try and get this issue raised at the city level. And Wisconsin, unfortunately, is one of only 18 states that has a ban on banning single-use plastics. So it's illegal for us in this state to create any ban on plastic bags, any ban on single-use plastics. So this working group that I chair, we're trying to figure out ways that we can have educational campaigns going on around the state. I'm trying to work with Super One on, can we do an educational booth one day on educating people about the impacts of plastic bags and encouraging people to reuse or to use reusable bags. And then eventually we're looking for a legislator that we can work with to try and revoke the 2018 ban on banning single-use plastics. So I am going to be speaking at the state conference about this. We have a presentation on our recycling plastics work group. I do have a credit card currently all chopped up in a glass jar because that's about the consumption that the average person is consuming in microplastics a week, is the weight of a credit card.
Pat?
A good thing my wife isn't here hearing all of this. God, we got to be more careful than we were. And we're really careful with that stuff. But Charlie, put on your council president hat for the moment. When the city of Ashland first went to having garbage carts and recycle carts in the alley like we currently do, with a firm that's been now bought out by another. At that time, when that was approved, I'm pretty darn sure I'm correct on this. At that time, residents were required to separate their garbage and recyclables. I'm getting to a point on what you said. Businesses were not required to separate their garbage and the recyclables. And when I asked why, I got immediate pushback. Oh, that's too much trouble. It's too much bother. That's too hard. They're in business. They got to make money. They don't have time for this. I heard all of that sort of stuff. One of our local businesses that serves fast food opened a few years ago, and someone from downstate came up here and was appalled that this single-serve plastic wasn't going into a recycle container. And I explained why, because city ordinance didn't require it. What I was told is that one way, even though we can't ban single-use plastic, by having an ordinance that requires fast food places and others to separate their garbage and recyclables, you then say to businesses, if you want to use single-use plastic, yes, that's legal, but by God, we can have an ordinance that says that you recycle that. Because if they don't recycle it, our rates for garbage and recyclables was based upon the ratio that got put in the landfill versus recycled. Whatever we recycle, there can be some revenue stream there or lower cost for disposal at the very least, even if it, a less expensive landfill or something, for example, if it doesn't need to be in a, the whole 9-yard land yard. Newsprint, for example, is, quite valuable for recycle, but, some things don't get recycled, but they don't need the big expensive landfill. So the garbage and recycle rates for Ashland overall would be more attractive for residents if everybody had to recycle, but it discourages single-use plastic if you really say, you got to separate this out or there's a consequence. And that's what at least one place down south had used to discourage single-use plastic. And they check what they put out, and you're not recycling, there's a consequence.
Yeah, I mean, there are some creative ways of still getting around the ban. Like Madison, or Dane County, they have banned styrofoam on all county property from vendors. So they have a lot of different county properties, parks, business or buildings. So they have required their vendors to not bring in single-use plastic or styrofoam products. The city of Madison and Milwaukee have banned straws, plastic straws. So there are ways that communities are trying to solve some of the issues, but they've done it kind of at the county level, and they've had to do it creatively.
Any more? Last call? A lot of interesting discussion here, to say the least, yes. We don't need any, we're not making any motions or anything, okay? Well, then let's go on to number 7, agency, NRCS, and staff reports.
Yep, and we don't have anyone from NRCS here today or agency, so we're going to start with our staff reports.
So I'll keep it brief. You'll have the report, I believe. Couple big updates. Our DACAP area engineer has taken a new position after almost 25 years. So what that means for our department, we can still design and get projects shovel ready to go. I don't have any job approval myself, but neighboring counties and stuff like that do. And there is someone appointed in the interim until they get that position filled permanently. So it shouldn't affect the workflow too much, but there might be some slight changes. Doesn't mean that we're not going to be able to implement good conservation this year. And another project I've been working on quite a bit is our well testing program. Those will be mailed out in the next week or so to 342 landowners with a targeted mailing, but it is open to the entire county, anyone interested. So if there's any questions, I can take those now. Thank you.
Questions, anyone? No? Okay. Oh, Jerry?
I think when I did it often whenever I get an opportunity to test my well through the department I do. And I had a certain amount of, I can't recall what it was, but anyway, since then I've had a plumber test it. And I said, I want to see how you take the sample and everything. See, I was probably told, but I don't always listen well, but he took a torch on, and maybe you've been telling people to do that, but I want to add that so that when somebody takes a water sample, that you tell them to heat the bottom of you're supposed to go to their basement to your lowest drain and stuff, your lowest faucet, and you're supposed to run heat it out so it's disinfected. And I hadn't done that. So this year when I get mine, I will. But I hope you can share that with the other people that do water sample. Thanks.
Yep, and there is some information on the sampling kit that gets sent out. So there's a few different ways you can test your water from directly the heater and torch it. It seems like the sample kits that we've been getting, they say to just run your water from a normal faucet, but there is some variations, and you can certainly sample that way as well.
I'll go next with my staff report. From last meeting, I completed putting in all of the filed projects from years past into the field mapping system. So that was really good to get done with the cabinet, and we should have all projects in. I was also hired on the GLRI grant for the new watershed project coordinator. So starting new in 2025, I will be working on that. Along with that new position, Mary Jo and I have been talking about different ways I can get into classrooms this year and implement more hands-on learning for students to get them more excited about land and water topics. I'm also working on starting an Earth Day photography contest that we will hopefully have going live within the next few weeks, just to get more excitement around the county about Earth Day and the beautiful area that we live in. And then lastly, just the few trainings and conferences that I've been to recently.
Alrighty, I can go next here. As always, feel free to let me know if you have any questions. Should have my report in front of you. I guess two kind of noteworthy things. Just wanted to give a really brief update on our tree and shrub program as well as our poster and speaking program. So for tree and shrub, we're up to 130 orders as of yesterday. So that's actually a little bit ahead of schedule compared to the last couple of years. So we're doing pretty good there. We are definitely starting to sell out of quite a few of our species. I would say approximately half of them are sold out of the actual species are sold out. But we do have some remaining species left as well. So if you are interested in getting an order in, or if you have friends, family, neighbors, etc., I would just get those orders in sooner rather than later, just so we have enough stock for you. And let's see. And then, poster and speaking, just wanted to give a quick update there. So we've had our county contest and our Northwest area contest. Ashland County had a really, really good showing at the Northwest contest. Very happy with how things turned out there. So all 5 of our posters in all 5 of the categories that are judged, every single one placed in the top 3 at the Northwest area. So that's pretty impressive to have students placed in the top 3 in literally every division there. And we do have 2 posters that are going to be advancing to the state contest. So that'll be at the Wisconsin Land and Water Conference coming up in March here. So definitely keeping our fingers crossed there. We ended up having 104 entries this year, which is pretty impressive numbers there. And yeah, just very thankful for all the teachers and the parents and guardians that are really getting their kiddos involved in this contest. So hopefully they're learning a lot and keep up the great work. So yeah, I think that's about all I had. I guess the last thing I was going to mention too is just we did have with that poster and speaking contest, we did have participation from literally every single every single school within the county, which I always like to see. It's kind of nice to see it's not just Mellon dominating or Ashland dominating or whoever it might be. We have a lot of representation from Our Lady of the Lake and all the school district of Ashland schools and Mellon and Butternut. Homeschool have really stepped up in the last few years. So it's really neat to see that it's definitely a strong variety of students participating. So thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to, one, ask where the public can see this artwork. And then two, I don't know if it was this year, but it would be, for instance, great to see it at the county fair. And then it would be nice to have this brought to the attention of the Bay Area Arts Council, because these are young people who are interested in expressing themselves graphically. And maybe there's some kind of connection there. Maybe they would sponsor an exhibit at the Cultural Center in Washburn or something of that nature. It'd be great to see this out more in the public.
That's a very good idea, George. Yeah, I jotted that down. I can certainly look into that. If you happen to have a contact there, if you are, to let me know, that'd be awesome. Yeah, and as far as getting more publicity for the posters, typically we try to be respectful of all the student entries and we try to get them back to the students. But yeah, I mean, as long as they're okay with us holding on to them for longer, we could certainly, display them wherever, as long as we can get their permission. That'd be great. And we do always, one kind of a neat thing that we do at our office, we do have kind of our poster wall of fame. So every year we take some of the first place winners from like the Northwest area, and especially if they go to the state contest, and we always like to make a scan of them. Heart Graphics takes care of that for us. And then we do frame them and put like their name, school, division, all that kind of stuff. So I know that's within our office, so it's a little bit, not quite as open to the public, since obviously we don't get a lot of foot traffic there. But I would certainly be interested in doing something, at the courthouse or wherever it might be to get more publicity.
We just, as a staff, talked about this the other day, and I will be speaking with Dan and Sue after our meeting today to find a spot in the courthouse that we can start posting these. So beginning in 2018 is when we started photocopying them and framing them. And we do have several posters left from previous years. So we could probably start putting up, we probably have about 6 or 7 that we could start posting. And we just need to find a spot and get permission if we can actually do that somewhere in the courthouse here.
George?
Just saying that I know it's in Bayfield County, but the Visitor Center is also a location that would have a lot of public exposure.
Dan?
There's also the Vaughn Library and the Black Cat.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for all those suggestions. That's very helpful.
Okay, any Mary Jo's left?
All right. Just a couple updates to address Jerry's point. Most of our funding comes from the state, and the state has not been impacted by the current legislation at the national level. We do have a couple of federal grants. One of the federal grants is our National Association of Conservation Districts grant. That is not going to be affected by any pause in operations or financial impacts. And then we have a Great Lakes Restoration Grant that is funding Ellie's position. And it looks like there's going to be some delay in that. but not necessarily any decline of funds. So our grant coordinator, who's at the DNR locally, is still trying to figure out the timeline on the allocation of that funding. But as far as where we sit today, we're not going to be impacted financially. It looks like most of the financial impacts are affecting people that are specifically working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's affecting more educational institutions and programs that are specific to those types of cultural focus. So hopefully it will not affect us in the future, but so far there has not been any sort of financial impact to our state association or individual counties dealing with conservation or environmental issues. A couple other things. As I mentioned earlier, I'm assisting with the county comprehensive plan updates. So that'll be a year-long process. And I'm specifically helping with our agriculture work and our natural resource work. In addition, pretty quick here, we're going to be getting started updating our farmland preservation plan. So that's a 10-year plan. It expires in 2026, but I did write a grant to the state, to the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection last year to be able to get funding for this year to hire the Northwest Regional Planning Commission. So we got approved for that funding back in July, and I've been in conversation with Jason Lauman at Northwest Regional Planning ever since. So we're just waiting to set a date that we'll actually start updating the farmland preservation plan, and their organization will facilitate the meetings and the writing of it. And I don't anticipate any sort of big changes with that plan. We only have 4 active participants in farmland preservation. And part of Matt Boland's job is to promote farmland preservation. He does have a couple of additional farmers that hopefully will get enrolled in the program. And just last year, the state increased the tax incentive on that program. So there are more tax incentives available for landowners now, including a decrease in the length of agreement. So it used to be a 15-year agreement with a $5 per acre tax incentive. Now they reduced it to a 10-year agreement, and they doubled the tax rate to $10 per acre. So hopefully we can get a couple more farmers on board to benefit with that. But we will be updating that farmland preservation plan this year. And then I'm working with Town of Marengo on updating their comprehensive plan. We've met 3 times already. That'll be a year-long process as well. And then we've closed out all of our grants and received all of our reimbursements from last year. So Carisha and I will be starting to work on an annual report. I like to provide an annual report to our county board and to the LCC each year. And now that we have all of our numbers and finances completed, we'll be working on assembling that. And whenever we decide to meet again, I'll have that available for you. And that's about it for what I'm going to talk about verbal updates. So if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Charlie,
Guess I would test those farms first for PFAS, just to know that they're good or if they're not. Yeah, but then I'm also thinking, where are we going to grow our food if we're all full of PFAS everywhere? You know, so I'm conflicted, but if
I think the easiest way for testing is going to be getting permission for all of the lands that we know have permits for septic spreading. You know, and the other thing is too, like landowners may not want to test. It's going to be up to them. So we run this well testing program every year. Seth's mails to over 300 people. We're lucky to get 40 landowners that want to participate. So sometimes people just don't want to know. But we can definitely look for some funding sources to provide options for testing, for soil testing and well testing, and then we'll work on compiling a list of where these lands are and who the landowners are. It's going to be a process, though. I mean, it's another big workload that just sort of landed on our doorstep, and just navigating, trying to figure out what is the process, what should we be doing, how do we go about this, how do we find funding. So it's going to be a process, not something that can just happen quickly.
Any more? Questions, comments?
Yeah, I just want to comment. Thanks for all the good sweets and cookies and coffee and taking care of us. We
Point
don't need
well
it, but it's
taken.
delicious. Thanks for all the good job you're doing, Mary Jo, and everybody else here, and all. Really interesting meeting, and I thank you for letting me be part of it.
Very good. Excuse me. Number 8, reports, updates, anything that we haven't covered yet? Looks like that's good. Other business? Seeing none? Oh, Charlie?
I guess, for the benefit of anyone here who might also be going, have we decided when the next comprehensive plan meeting is gonna happen? This 20th,
On the
Oh, yeah.
20th.
Next Thursday, 2:00 in the afternoon here.
okay. Thank you.
Schedule next meeting date.
How about April? Couple months, April, May? We don't have any action that's going to be coming up in the next month or so that's going to require any sort of approvals.
I prefer we get into
Fine by
May.
me.
May? Okay, we can do May. 3 months from today would be May 14th. How does that sound for everyone? What's that?
9 a.m.
Yeah, let's do May 14th. It's the week after our tree and shrub. I don't want to do it prior to that because we're going to be pretty busy that week with our tree and shrub sale. But let's look at May 14th.
May 14th, 9 a.m. it is.
Okay,
And I'd like a motion to adjourn. Charlie motions,
Second.
George seconds, all in favor?
I.
Aye. Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah. Very interesting.